Oh, wow. So they're full on fighting, trying to kill each other at 8 weeks old.
Oh yeah, they can get super aggressive and even to people. So
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Standing Stone podcast. Today, we have a very special guest, Cheryl with Outlander GSPs, and a interesting conversation that went a little bit of a different direction than what I initially expected, but always fun to chat. Cheryl's an absolute wealth of knowledge and a ton of experience. It was fun to hear her stories, and I'm excited to share that with you today. If this is your first time to the podcast, I would love if you could take the time to give us a 5-star rating or give this video, if you're actually watching on YouTube, there's a couple different places that you can get this, a thumbs up. Make sure and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the upcoming events. And as always, special features and added stuff available through Patreon, patreon.com/Standing Stone Kennels. Patreon is also a really cool way if you are training your dog yourself. It is set up to be as little as Q&A on the daily or as much as a complete one-on-one training program for you and your dog. All that being said, I hope you enjoy our conversation today. Everybody, this is Miss Cheryl. Thank you for joining me today. You are the owner, and I don't know if there's a co-ownership or just a basic partnership with Outlander GSPs, but the breeder of Quest. Most of the people listening here know of Quest, and Quest is actually, Cheryl is where we got Quest from. So if you have the ability for me, Cheryl, give me a little background on your experience, your history with dogs, kind of how you got into that, and then why you do it, basically.
okay, so long time ago in the 70s, I bought a collie, a rough collie female, who ended up being a very important dog in the collie world, which I never knew. And I bred her a couple times, and she was actually line bred on a dog that was very fundamental to that breed. Now, I don't even ask me who it was because I don't remember anymore. But then I was watching Gunsmoke one day, and there was this big, ugly black and tan dog on there, and I'm like, I'm gonna get me one of those. And it was a Rottweiler. So I got in my Volkswagen that was down to 3 cylinders and 1 headlight and drove to Chicago from Minnesota and picked up a Rottweiler. I was a terrible dog owner and didn't do much with that dog. But a few years later, I bought a female Rottweiler. Now, this was back in the heyday of the Rottweilers before they were completely destroyed. And I showed her and she was actually ranked number 8 in the nation when that was at the peak of the breed. And her sire was number 1. And I did some AKC obedience stuff with her. I did some tracking, and I did a TDX. It's tracking dog excellent. And then I never went to utility, did a CDX. And then I bought a German bred Rottweiler and did Schutzen with him and Schutzen with her, and kind of got into that for a while. About, fast forward 12, 13 years later, I realized that even though I loved that breed, I hated the people who were coming and buying my puppies.
Sure, buying
so they
dogs
were
for
just,
the wrong reason,
I don't
probably,
even.
right?
Yeah, they just were. And I didn't want anything to do with that, so I ended up spaying, one of the top females in the country. Even though she got gold awards for, breeder awards and things like that. But and I bred a dog that won the specialty show 3 years in a row, and so I kind of got into breeding through Rottweilers. Actually,
Interesting.
I always hunted bird dog, and my dad always had Airedales and Airedale mutts. And so I don't know if you've ever hunted with an Airedale or anything, but they are the consummate.
Or similar.
An Airedale is a great big furry black and tan terrier who is, they're not for everybody. The show ones, they look pretty mild and stuff, but the dogs we used to have They would hunt and kill anything, including your neighbor's dog. But they were not just cats. They were a great big tough badass dog. And
Okay.
that's what I always hunted over my whole life. Great with people, but not very good with dogs. And great coon dogs, cornfields of North Branch, Minnesota at night, um, pheasants, ducks, all sorts of animals, anything you wanted to hunt with that those dogs would hunt. But I never really got into breeding with those. So I grew up hunting over bird dogs. They were flushers, somewhat point. They would freeze for sure on a bird. Um, but so would a lab will sometimes freeze too. But a terrier will definitely freeze and then take them out. Then I got a lab again, and then I met some people out in Colorado when I moved out in Colorado, and I ended up getting a female from Indian Brook Kennels, and the breeder of that litter was Tom Swayze. He owned probably the last breeding daughter of Hill Haven's Hustler,
Okay.
and her name was Indian Brook Hustlin' Crystal. And he bred her kind of later in her life. I'm not, don't quote me exactly on this. I think she was 7, 8 years old, maybe even 9, and it was her only litter. And I we I met this guy named Gary Hutchinson of Westwind German Shorthair pointers, and the guy is like a walking German Shorthair pointer encyclopedia. But I met him at a hunt test one day, and I was testing, doing a master hunt test that weekend
Mm-hmm.
with Crystal for her owner, who was off judging an avid test. And I had never done a master hunt test, and I knew the first day she took me to town, and so I took her behind a car and had a come to Jesus meeting with her. And this guy comes around the corner and he goes, "Is that a hustler granddaughter?" And I said, "No, it's a hustler daughter." He said, "No, it's not." I said, "Yes, it is." And he goes, "No, it's not." And I said, "Yes, it is." And so I had to bring her papers the next day. And he's like, "Oh my gosh, she is." So anyway, so we on his recommendation, bred her to Jacob von der Westwind, owned by Fred Rice,
Mm-hmm.
who was a double bred hustler grandson. Both
Yeah.
of his parents were out
Grandsire
of
on both
hustler.
sides, or grandsire?
Both of his parents were out of hustler.
Got it.
Okay. So whatever that would be, I think that's a
Yeah.
double bred grandson.
Grandpa both sides. Yep.
Um,
These are a lot of
yeah.
really
Yep.
familiar names from our conversation that I had not very long ago.
I know, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay,
That's
so
pretty
we
fun.
bred Crystal, or Tom bred Crystal to Jacob.
Mm-hmm.
Had 11 puppies, and I just said I'll just take the last puppy that nobody takes. And these puppies went to a lot of kind of well-known people. I'm not going to mention their names, but they did. And I took this little brown dog, the only one that didn't point the day that we tested them all. She didn't point till she was 12 weeks old, and I know, right? That's my favorite kind. So she did finally. She point one day, 12 weeks old. She pointed a dragonfly, and it that was the beginning of, yeah, one of the best pointing. Her points were, anybody who ever saw Maisie, that was Indian Brook Espresso. Anybody that ever saw her was just, her points were like, she was like a wax statue. She even had like signature points. Her points were completely different than her backs. Her
Interesting.
backs were like an English pointer, head up, chest out, throwing herself forward. I could always walk up on them and go, okay, that one backed and that one found the bird, because I knew what they looked like. But her points were head down, foot up, just all crunched forward toward the
Sure.
bird, whereas the
Sure.
back was just completely different. She was a gorgeous, gorgeous animal. Steadiness was always an issue. Again, that's my favorite kind of dog. I like that drive, that where they're always just on the edge of
Uh-huh.
maybe not, of maybe not
On the
doing
edge
it.
of maybe not being
And
steady today.
exactly. And we'll talk about that later when we talk about Quest. And she was just exactly opposite of the Quest type of dog.
Mm-hmm.
and her sister, who I co-owned, Q. They're not that dog. They're always going to be steady. They're just
Yeah.
100% on that. And that's nice for a lot of things. Trust me, lots and lots of things. But I prefer the edgy dog. And that was Maisie. But she was a VC and a master hunter by the time she was 3 years old. And that was back in the day when the invitation was every other year. Mm-hmm. She never got a perfect score. I don't think she would have been capable of a perfect score, but then her trainer wasn't either. But that was a very well-bred dog. Her litter mate to her was a dog that went to Steve Reese of Top Gun Kennel in Iowa, and her name was Indian Brook Emmy, and she's behind a lot of the Garbonita dogs. She's, that dog that Tim Clark has, Tell, I think his name is. That's his mother or his grandmother is out of that. I actually ran one of Maisie's daughters in the invitational with a full cousin of hers, first cousin, right? They both, the dog I ran and the dog I was braced with that Al Burkhart was running, had their mothers were litter mates. So it was very nice. These were just solid short hairs, period. Yep. So that's how I got started in short hairs. And so what I like to breed for, and a lot of people like to breed keeping that one dog in their pedigree, right? Mm-hmm. I like to keep that cross in my pedigrees. The cross of the Indian Brook E litter, which was Jacob and Crystal. And Crystal was one of those edgy dogs. In a master hunt test, she'd go, I'm going to move 1 foot. Okay. Just what she did. She just had to, she was a fabulous hunting dog, but maybe not the best test dog in the world.
Sure. Give me just 1 second here, and I'll pull up that pedigree that everybody that is watching via YouTube. All of these podcasts are available not only on Standing Stone Podcast YouTube channel, but also any place you can listen to a podcast. So if you're listening right now and you want to go back and look at what Cheryl is very quickly moving through here with different dogs and the genetics, I will pull that up here as we continue talking. So we're looking at, it was Indian Brook's E litter, which is the Emmy, and then you had you said
espresso, like
espresso.
Oh. Emmy died rather young, tragically. So she only had 2 litters, I believe.
They know what happened?
Yeah, she had pyometria.
Oof. So pyometria would be an infected uterus, correct? Uterine infection.
Mm-hmm. I don't know the details of it, so that's all I can say. I didn't own her at the time at all. Last time I saw her, she was 8 weeks old.
Okay. So, interesting for me to hear this, but collies to Rotties to Airedales, is that how you say that? Not Arendelle, Airedale?
No, I grew up with Airedales, so we never bred those.
You grew up with Airedales. Okay. So that would have been more the start, but then got into collies and Rotties and then back to Airedales from a hunting standpoint before short hairs?
No. I was just saying that's how even when I was a kid, we had bird dogs and hunted birds. I was never, my dad really never thought I was a hunter. Really?
I don't know anybody that has an Airedale like today. It's not a very common, I wouldn't have considered that a even remotely common bird dog breed.
No.
And they're just more of a all-around hunting dog, right? Like you said,
they're really good. Oh yeah, my God, yeah. They were horrors. We had one that was really aggressive with other dogs. I'm not going to even get into those stories, but So I took and I bred Maisie. The first breeding I bred her to was to this dog that had a lot of cooperation. I'm not saying Maisie did not have cooperation, but I would say that line, that cross that we're talking about, that you're trying to find the pedigree for, the E litter with Jacob under Westwind and a hustler daughter. The hustler daughter, Crystal, was out of some old field trial dogs. And so there was always that little piece that I think it kind of made Maisie. And not all of her siblings or litter mates were that independent or big running, because she was really a big running dog. You had to bring her in big time to do anything with her, because she would have just been gone. She was a dog that you could do a lot of training with and she'd just get better. I mean, it's like she could take a licking and keep on kicking, I guess. But she was, anytime you had to show her very sternly what you needed her to do, she never, a lot of times with dogs, if you start getting their steadiness jacked up, if you start training for steadiness, maybe their search comes in a little bit. You see the pressure come out in those desire areas, right, where you want them to get out. And there are some trainers who flat out will not train steadiness and duck search at the same time, because they think steadiness hurts their duck search, and they're right. But not certain dogs, and not her. And that's what I really liked about her, is you could really, really train her and she would just get better every single time. So I strive for that.
Go ahead. Yeah, it's
I strive for that. I don't get it though. Yes. Well, even in that litter, because I remember talking to Steve Reese about Emmy, or not, maybe not Steve, might have been Jeff Chapman, who owned her in the end. They thought she was soft. Emmy was soft, and that always amazed me, because let's see, I knew a few from that litter, and there was one male that was he pretty much, I would say he was softish. When he was corrected for steadiness, he ended up laying down on points in that litter. And another one, he would never lay down a point. Another, I don't know. I would say there was probably 50% of them were what you might call soft and soft-ish, and 50% were good, high drive, high cooperation, and big runners. And that was my experience with that litter. Yeah. As they came through. But anyway, yeah, and that's just who knows where all that comes from. Those dogs are old-timey dogs.
I found it finally. We're gonna share a window. Share.
Okay.
Ta-da! Can you see it now? Did it pop up on your end?
Yeah. I had to get something off my screen.
Here is sorry for the long thing. I had a baby heart attack while I was working through that, because the files were pushed to online only, and it pulled up and it showed that my database didn't exist, which is scary. And it also showed that there were no recent backups and all kinds of fun things. So makes you worry for a second there, but here it is. We have the E-litter. So tell me if I've got any errors in here. This is always something I try and do, but we've got
I don't have a real big screen of it, so it's hard for me. But
no, I'll walk through it for you. International champion, versatile champion, master hunter, natural ability, prize 1, utility, prize 1. That all sound right?
Yeah. Who are you looking at?
Jacob.
Wonder if I can make this Indian bigger without hanging up. Yep. And Jacob was a master hunter. Crystal was a master hunter. Crystal never got her VC. She went twice And she was one of those dogs that kind of, she did not get the luck of the duck on the duck search. She
Sure.
searched for 20 minutes she was on 3 legs. She was 10 years old and she never quit. And that was heartbreaking. And she just couldn't find her duck. And, some wild ducks came and were taunting her away. And it was horrible. But yep, otherwise she did good. The first time she went, a bird was shot. It was at Kelly Farms, Minnesota. Bird was, I think it was in 96 or something like that, 98, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And it literally landed on her head. I'm kidding you. There was all sorts of things that went funky that day, but whatever. I don't remember it all. It's so long ago.
Well, and for those of you that are listening that didn't fully understand or quite catch, so she was saying that Crystal never became a versatile champion, which is, we're talking about the NAVDA test, which is the highest level of achievement. And previously, before Cheryl and I were actually talking about this, and this is pre my time, but there used to be a search of duck proportion at the invitational, not just at the utility level. And that's been replaced now more recently with the double mark, right?
Right. Yes.
So this is the pedigree that we were talking about specifically. And here's the hustler combo. And then mixed in with a smidgen of an outcross type here, but not a huge outcross because you are looking at similar genetics where you have Essers, Duke, and then you have Mark von Essers here as well. So those are going to be potential of similar genetics mixed in with that. And we'll do, just for the sake of doing it, because we talked about this with Fred when we did that call too, inbreeding coefficients and stuff, and we'll just pull this up where it is more of a line breeding. You can see her report here. Her inbreeding coefficient is 15.5268%, so 15.5%, with a total number of unique ancestors of 618. So not an overly tightly bred litter, pretty standard for a lot of the stuff that I try and stay with today. I mean, that's more a sweet spot that we stay in, that 10 to 15% and 500 to 600 unique dogs. It seems to provide pretty consistent litters.
Yeah.
Now, it's an interesting ride, basically, in changing of breeds, which I would say for me, my experience doesn't happen all that often. It's one of those things that I feel like more people were raised around a specific breed or raised around a specific type of dog, even maybe, and that's kind of what, or first introduced to, maybe not even raised around, right? But first introduced to, and switching breeds like that is an interesting thing. But the thing that you did have, you explained, was probably pretty uniform across all of that, was quality. Talking about top dogs in, influential status wise from a collie standpoint, as well as the Rottweilers having top showing dogs or close to top dogs in the nation, right? I mean, that's quality genetics, and that requires an eye for it, as well as, the ability to attempt to maintain a standard through breeding. And one of the things that I really wanted to be able to touch with you on today is you have a ton of experience with breeding with different breeds, and as well as quite a bit of experience with short hairs specifically. And we've had multiple different conversations about lots of different things. And when we chatted on the phone, I made a big long list. So we'll see what of these things we get to. But I wanted to talk about some of the things most specifically that just really don't get talked about, right? Breeding is borderline romanticized. I hear a lot from people, and I am not, nor are you, and I know that you feel this way, so I'm very confident to talk for you in this spot. You're not the keeper of who can and can't breed what dogs, right? It's not. No. It's not my place. But there are some people that you go, you really aren't doing it for the right reasons. It doesn't seem like you don't have a goal of it and bettering the breed and following some level of the standard to the best of your ability. And there are going to be differences. Like you say, this is more the direction that I'm looking for out of our short hairs. And somebody else may say, I'm looking for a little more differences this way, right? Based off of
Mhm.
personal preferences. And that's all fine. But I think that people get this idea like, I want to have a litter of puppies out of my dog so that we can experience that together. And they don't truly, maybe it's ignorance, maybe it's just not looking into it or not even really thinking, but probably mostly ignorance of there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong. There's a lot of
Right.
stuff that can go wrong for mom. There's a lot of stuff that can go wrong with the puppies. You may get lucky and have that Cinderella story of a perfect breeding that all the things were perfect. But I think more often than not, more recently, I've heard from people upwards of horror stories like struggled. We just wanted a litter to get a dog out of our amazing dog that's been a huge part of our family and all of that stuff. And then she ended up having to have a C-section and died on the table, right? Or shortly thereafter during the C-section. And now we've got 3 or 5 or 6 or whatever puppies to bottle feed and raise and try and take care of. So I would
Yeah,
say,
that's important.
oops, say it again.
Yeah, that would be. I've never had that one. Knock on wood yet. So
Knocking on everything, I personally haven't had to do a C-section, nor have I planned one. Like sometimes with other breeds specifically, they plan C-sections kind of, I've been thinking French bulldogs specifically, right? So they bred them to the point where the mom dogs can't really do a good job because the heads of the puppies are too large to fit with what the breed is trying to produce. And
right.
so they plan C-sections out, so it's a more standard thing with some, but with the average sporting dog, C-sections aren't a normal thing, but do happen. So, and with all of those things being said, I talked about breeding through a standard and improving on things. Now, one of the things that I want to mention to kind of kick this off was I have a note down here about mice with testosterone versus estrogen supplements. What was that study in regards to? Was it have to do with males versus females in litter sizes, or
No, that's
do you
not
remember
quite
what
it.
I'm talking
But
about?
that I guess if I was talking about mice and testosterone, it is some of the studies they found that is if rats or mice are born in a litter, or let's say they're all, you know how they are in a uterine horn, right? They're kind of lined up on this side and lined up on the other side. If there's a
Yep.
male, let's say there's one male that's lined up between two females, okay, or a female lined up between two males, they have more, when they're born, that male will have more estrogen than a male that's sitting there with 2 3 males next to him, whatever that
That's what we
means
were
as far as
talking
how they
about.
look or act. Who knows, but that is a study. I think the dog I was talking about in particular was um sharpshooter's letter Rip. He was a dog bred by Clyde, Maryland, and he was owned by Ken and Liz Horner or Liz Dyer and Ken Horner in Colorado. And anyway, that dog he was pretty, like really pretty. And but he was a huge dog. He wasn't non-manly, but he was also just gorgeous. He was in a litter of all females. Every dog in that litter
Interesting.
was a female, except him. And he was an amazing dog. And I don't usually breed to a dog more than once, but I bred to him 3 times, and I'd still breed to him.
Interesting.
And he's dead, it would have to be frozen. But he produced size. He
Mm-hmm.
produced that pretty. Um, I mean, your dog Quest, if you were to pull up a picture of Rip on my website, for example, it'd be International Champion VC Sharpshooters Letter Rip. You would think you're looking at Quest. And that is her great grandpa. I mean, he just produced, and I don't know what I'd have to look at what his inbreeding coefficient was, but if you bred to Rip, you would get Rip, and you would get it like 2-3 generations. It was it's like Hustler was like that. He just produced himself, even though he had like 1 point something inbreeding coefficient, but he stamped his what would you call it, morphology, how he looked, and then also how he acted, and how he hunted, and his cooperation level and his desire for generations, no matter what you bred him to.
I don't think you have him on here anymore.
Yeah, he's on there. If you go to like the K litter, for example, just go to old R litters, and then I think he's a sire of the K. Yeah, that might be one way to find him. But you would think you're looking at Quest.
Interesting.
I mean, same colors.
Let's see. Yeah. Oh yeah, there's a lot of similarities there. Yeah, let me see if I
Isn't that weird?
Real quick. Now, were we also specifically talking about the dog having more estrogen as being a poor stud dog, like the dogs that don't have as much?
No, he was not a poor. No, he was a great stud. He'd do it all day, every day. So, and that he was fine. He was actually, he wasn't maybe the smartest bull, but he wasn't the smartest dog in the world, I don't think, but he was never quit. Never quit. Isn't that crazy? He looks like Quest so much. That's all that white, that hot ticking. That is the only place I ever bred to for that. And she's 3 generations removed from him. But yeah, I do breed kind of into that line. So, whatever.
Okay. So it's there.
It's
now in the breeding.
He's even behind your Muddy. Your Muddy is, I think.
Yeah, because he's in there too. We'll pull this up.
Frappuccino. So the K litter, is it Muddy? Who's older? Muddy is the mom of Grit.
Muddy's a little older. Yeah, Grit's older of the two. Yes.
So Grit's mother was a daughter of him.
Okay.
And Quest's mother was a granddaughter of him. So I do keep going a little bit back and forth with that stuff, so that you get that type. He would never quit, though. I mean, he was like, but I would say he wasn't as hard as Maisie, but he wasn't by any means soft either.
Now, in all of your breeding, Cheryl, have you ever come across, what are some of the things that you have specifically come across that you've had to breed around, or you've had to try and breed past or avoid the plague? I mean, there's got to be.
Well, there are some, I bred to Enzo, and he tended to have, there were some, and I didn't get it with Flicker. Okay. But she produced some of it, and maybe 1 out of 9 or 10 puppies would have a rye bite, not a true rye. It wasn't, it was more of a malocclusion. A true rye bite is when the jaw is actually malformed, and they never had that. But you might have, for the incisors, instead of having a scissors bite or an underbite or an overbite, you would have a half under, half overbite. That's a rye bite or a malocclusion or whatever you want to call it. I had a couple of those, and I had to try to get that out. And then the Maisie line, I know, right? And I don't know that I ever had an underbite or an overbite. And then Maisie's line I don't know if, I don't think there was never any in Crystal's litter, none that I know of. None of those had umbilical hernias. And and Maisie produced, let's see, I think she produced one or two, but they were never bred, obviously. And then Flicker produced one out of 4 litters. So, I don't see it at all anymore. If it popped up, I wouldn't be shocked. I mean, because obviously it's in there. I've never had, and so I tried to breed around out of that, but I didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I didn't go, oh my God, there's umbilical hernias in my line, I'm going to spay them all. No, I didn't do that. You just, because there's always something. I've had some Menorcad puppies, which was weird. It was 1 litter, had a Menorcad puppy in it. And that
All right, I'm not
was
familiar with that.
1 nut, 1 testes, sorry.
Okay. I got you,
Okay.
gotcha.
Gotcha. All right. And that
I thought
was
you were
out of
saying
mating.
Norkid, and I
No,
misunderstood you.
Menorcad. Yeah. Menorcad, mono. Crypto orchid is none. And that was interesting
Okay.
because I brought her to a dog who has never produced it. And that was her 4th litter, and she never produced it before. So, I've got a very
So
good
how much
friend
of that
who,
would be, yeah, so how
well,
much of
I
that
was
do you
going
think
to
is
say,
the potential of not being genetic, actually, right?
well, the umbilical hernias were genetic. Okay. And the bite was genetic. The bite thing was genetic. But the Menorcad was, in my opinion, is not. I have a very
There's
good
not
friend
enough
who is
evidence to say that that specifically was, right?
I'm just going to say that it isn't. And here's what I've got a friend who's a genetic counselor. For
Okay.
humans, and she's also a Briard breeder. She goes to become a genetic counselor for humans. You have about as much medical training and education as an MD. So she's really
Interesting.
knowledgeable, right? But more in
Hmm.
genetics. Now, I called her up. Is this genetic? I don't remember what we were talking about, but she goes, well, Cheryl, everything's genetic and everything isn't genetic. I'm like, oh, thanks. So, but that was what she said. And that is true. So what she explained it, and I'll explain it here. Everything is genetic and everything is not genetic. So is cancer genetic? Maybe. Is, hip dysplasia genetic? Maybe. Is this bite thing that I had going genetic? Maybe. So I said, so how do you know? How do you know if it is and how do you know if it isn't? She goes, well, if you've seen it in more than 1 breeding or more than even 2, that's probably genetic. But if you have
Sure.
it come up, like I talked about with that Menorcad puppy, with a male that hasn't produced it and a female that hasn't produced it, and they basically are the same lines. So, it's, if I was an outcross, I could say, well, maybe it was because of the mingling of those two, right? It was the interaction therein. But probably not, because they both come out of basically very, very similar, if not the same lines. So that was something that was probably environmentally predicated. So let's say the female was the mom when maybe something happened in utero when the puppies were inside of her, right? Because I've never seen it. I mean, she's spayed now. But it was her 4th litter, and she averaged like 9 puppies a litter. So
A good
I got,
pool
I would
there
say,
to look at.
yeah, I would say she doesn't produce it now, but he's been bred to 3 different dogs and has had good sized litters, and he's never produced. So I would say he doesn't produce it either. But there it is. So that one
So,
probably not genetic.
well, now was her 4 litters, they weren't all the same dog. You said you rarely do that.
All different
Were
sizes.
each
Yeah.
of the 4 litters all different studs? Okay.
Yep.
So that can have
And
something to do with
that's
it. It might have just been the one cross.
what, like I said, that's possible. It is possible, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's genetic. All she said is it's probably not.
Mm-hmm.
And it would only ever occur in that one cross again. Anyway, right?
Theoretically, right?
More than likely.
That would
Yeah.
be more than likely. Yep. So the
Now
thing is, we've
there's
seen
another word.
probably.
There's another
Okay.
word to think about. It's called congenital. Okay. So there's genetic and congenital. And if you don't, and I'm sure everybody knows what genetic is supposed to mean anyway, but means it happened because of the genes. It's, whatever. It was in their
Mhm.
genes that would happen, or in the cross, or whatever. But congenital, that could be genetic too, but congenital means present at birth. That's all that means. And so there can be a lot of things that are present at birth, like
Interesting.
a puppy with cerebral palsy or something that gets lack of oxygen when it's being born, or something like that. But breeding is not, this is what you and I have discussed many times. It isn't a Cinderella story. It's not for the faint at heart. I've had litters that took the life right out of me, just different things that happened with the puppies, and it didn't come out the way I wanted. And, or a puppy just complete, just keeping it alive and getting it to, from here to there, just takes everything you have. And sometimes you should, or sometimes you shouldn't have done that, but you don't ever know that until you do it. I personally,
Sure.
I have a little brother who's got cerebral palsy. So for me, I will do, I have this something in me that just makes me, I don't even care if they
Want to
come, if
want to
like I
try a
have had
little
a
harder?
puppy. That's right. I have had a puppy that's absolutely crippled. Yet something was screwed up in his back. And
Mm-hmm.
he wasn't born that way. It happened. And I know when he got hurt, but he still kind of runs around like, a lot of breeders would go, man, I wouldn't want to put my name on anything that looked like that. He can't move his back end very good, but he uses it
Sure.
as a tripod. So he can get around pretty dang good. He points, he fetches, he does everything, but he's a mess. He's an absolute mess. And because of that stunting at that point, even his head looks a little funny because of the neurological damage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything looks kind of funky on him because of it. And I'll put my name on him. I don't care. He tries. And as a matter of fact, he tries harder than any other dog just to be a German Shorthair. And he is a German Shorthair. And he is an Outlander German Shorthair. And I'm proud of him. So there. I
So
don't need
you
to
said
please. I don't need to please anybody.
I like it. Well, I like it. That's what I like about you, Cheryl. The question I have, you said when he got hurt. What actually happened? Mom step on him or something like that happened, or?
He was, I don't know what happened, but I heard a loud cry, and he cried and he cried and he cried and he cried probably for like 3 days.
Yeah.
And
Oof.
that puts you about at your wit's end, right? And then he
Yeah.
just stopped, but he kept trying to nurse. And it was like day 2, and I didn't observe it, put it that way. Mom was in there though.
Sure.
My guess is, I don't know. I'm guessing she stepped on him or something,
I
because
mean,
she
that
was standing up
happens.
when I was in there. It does, yeah.
Yeah. That
And
happens.
that Rottweiler I was telling you about that I had, her sire I don't know if anybody knows anything about showing, but he had 25 best in shows, which is almost unheard of in his life. He was just
Hmm.
an amazing animal. I don't care what breed of dog it was, but he was born in a litter of 8. And his mother literally, they were doing some construction like day 1 of when they were born. And so
Okay.
his owners were outside helping doing this construction. She stepped on and killed all but him.
Oh my goodness.
So I know. So he
There's
was a
a
one
there's a
puppy.
100% horror story for you. Like, I can't
Yeah.
imagine.
No, I can't either. And then he ends up being like that, and that's such a great dog. And he was an ambassador. He was just
Goodness.
amazing. But anyway, so that kind of stuff happens, I guess. So, and like I said, that puppy took to keep him, fed. He was a fighter, And he's still a fighter. He's happy. He's not in pain. If he was in pain, that would have been I would have done the right thing. But he was not in pain except for those first few days. And I don't know. But he ended up a mess. Outlander's
Well,
I'm a
so
Mess. No, that's not his name, but whatever.
Outlander's I'm a Mess. We had a similar-esque stories. Now, this is interesting you said that specifically about not knowing until you know, basically, if you're in regards to specifically helping a puppy through things or trying to give a little extra. And I've heard somebody say in the past, your litter is only as good as your weakest puppy. What is your opinion on that?
No, that's ridiculous.
I have an opinion on it as well, but
I don't believe that personally. But I mean, so I should say that there's one dog in the litter that has something wrong with it. All the other ones are less than him. No, that doesn't make sense.
Oh, I think what it comes down to, and so I get like there's somebody has enough to say something. A lot of times there's some level of truth to it, like if you look at it right, or you maybe think about it the way they're thinking about it. And I think what it comes down to is when you have those almost, you want to call it special need puppies or things that you're applying extra time to, that it does pull time away from the rest of the litter, whether they 100% needed it or not. So that I think is the meaning. And I have noticed in a couple opportunities that we've been raising litters that you have a puppy or we had a bigger litter a while ago that was like 12 maybe, and 2 of them were struggling a little bit. And so they were getting bottle fed and they were getting extra attention and they were getting all of the things. And it takes so much additional time that, it feels a little bit like the rest of the litter is getting, quote unquote, a little neglected, right? And
totally.
Did it affect them in the long run? No, but it's, so it was an interesting thought that somebody had said to me, and I was like, I see where you're coming from, but I'm with you in this. Like, nah, I don't believe that. I mean, like it just means I've got a lot more work ahead of me, right? More hours to make sure everybody gets what they need.
Well, first of all, since I had Rottweilers, okay, those were my first 4 litters that I ever had. Well, 5. Well, actually, I had 2 collie litters. I won't count those. But anyway, since I had those Rottweilers, I will tell you that's a whole different breed, obviously, and their temperaments are very different. You don't really have to worry so much maybe with the versatile breeds as maybe some of them you do, but you don't. But with Rottweilers, for example, by the time they're 8 weeks old, they do start picking on each other. And you don't really get that, at least in a short-haired litter, you don't get that. I don't know if you would in some of the other breeds. I really don't know, so I'm not going to make a comment.
What level of picking on each other are you talking about? Because I see some attempts of big time.
So that one, it will affect them for the rest of their lives kind of level.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so
they're full on fighting, trying to kill each other at 8 weeks old.
Oh yeah, they can get super aggressive, and even to people. So what I learned to do with them, and I carried it over into short hair. So I literally make myself spend a certain amount of time with each puppy, and I do certain things with each puppy. I did used to write it down, but I'd have to find that. It's probably on a DVD. It's probably on a floppy disk somewhere, right? That I'm not sure I could ever even get open again. But basically it was called the Super Dog Program was the first one.
Yeah.
It's one thing I do. And then the other one I do. And so you are kind of forced. If you're not forced, but you will spend X amount of time and do X, Y, and Z with each puppy from day 0. Well, maybe not day 0, day 1. I mean, you do this, you do that. I mean, there's certain things you do with them. You hold them this way, you rub this, you rub that, you kind of squeeze on this, you do that. You do all sorts of things with each puppy. So as far as 0 to 14 days, I do that like religiously. And then when they get older, I do the 777, and that is, 7 surfaces. You kind of have to go, and that's called the pat. Who did that program?
Okay,
I have to
you
think
skim
about it.
over stuff, Cheryl, like everybody in the whole world is as knowledgeable as you. I have never
Yeah,
heard
right.
of the
Oh, Carmen
777.
Battaglia. Carmen Battaglia.
Okay, so I've heard of Carmen, however you say his last name, because that's a man,
B-A,
right?
it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
Battagio. And so you just
And
make
he
sure
has
that
the
they
Breeders
get all
Connection
this stuff.
or the Breeders
I don't know.
something. It's like a
Who knows?
newsletter that he puts out
Does he?
randomly. It's not even quarterly. I
Okay.
don't think it's. I just get emails. It seems to have no rhyme or reason. But
Yeah, that sounds about right. And actually, he kind of stole this program from somebody else, but that's whatever.
okay.
Um, that because I knew of it long before he had it. But
So
that's one thing you can do is so it kind of forces you when you have that needy puppy that takes a lot of your time. It kind of forces if you put any, I don't care what you don't have to do the programs I'm suggesting, but if you do any type of, first of all, 0 to 14 days an imprinting program, and then after that you do some sort of exposure program from 2 weeks to 8 weeks or even beyond. So that's what all I would say to people is if you do have that needy puppy that takes the extra time, as long as you force yourself, because you're tired, you're just like, oh my God, I've just spent 10 minutes trying to get this thing to eat 4 ounces of food. If you're at that
mhm.
point, you force yourself to attend to the other puppies, you just will. And that's
So
how I deal with that.
walk me through this
Because if you don't do that
777
with
thing.
Rottweilers, you will get dominant puppies, shy puppies, and what they call middle of the road puppies. And a lot of people still use that terminology. I want that middle of the road puppy. Well, that doesn't have as much meaning. The middle of the road puppy for short hairs is maybe the one that I don't even know what that means for short hairs, to tell you the truth. I kind of go along with it sometimes. And sometimes I can kind of see it. But if you do all those things that I said, like the imprinting the first couple of weeks, and then the other, exposure type of stuff in the rest of the time, then you will never get a dominant or a shy puppy. All the puppies it's almost like you level the playing field.
Interesting.
You bring up that shy puppy and you tone down that dominant puppy. At least in Rottweilers, you do. No, I can't imagine it doesn't do the same thing for short hairs.
So I just found it on the internet as referred to as the rule of 7 in puppy socialization.
There you go.
And that was based off of the
Okay.
article with Dr. Carmen, not even a try, Carmen B. So,
Yeah, right.
so we actually do
Yeah.
early neurological stimulation or super dog or
Perfect.
biosensor training. It's got a bunch of different names. And we start that. So there's what I've been able to research and find is there's a number of different people that have opinions on starting at day 1, 2, or 3 or something. With the most common theme
It's like
being
whatever, right?
day 2. And that goes through like the
There you go.
first 2 weeks. So through day 14 approximately. And we do that with all of our litters and all of our puppies. And it, for those listening, as you said, handling and touching and doing everything, basically, it only takes a few seconds to a minute with each puppy, and you have them where they normally would lay on their tummy. Then you roll them to their back, and then you have them head erect, and then you have them upside down for just a few short seconds. And if you think about what happens to your body during that time period, it's the blood rushes to whichever is, gravity, right? Down. And that kind of forces blood around, as well as you get the benefit of the puppy being handled. So 100% it makes sense, even on the smallest level of puppies getting a small amount of additional handling. That's 100% applied to every puppy evenly in the very early stages of life. This isn't taking them from the box. I've even seen some extreme versions of this. I don't know if you've seen this, but something about like dunking puppies underwater for a second. And I don't remember who it was that said that was part of some development program, something. Well, a bunch of their puppies ended up with pneumonia, and go figure, right?
Yeah, exactly. Stupid.
Sounds
Jeez.
a little extreme. But these things are all
Well,
pretty
now
basic.
with Rottweilers, for example, there were some temperament tests that we would do for that kind of dog anyway, that I always found. The one thing I found kind of useful for hunting for versatile dogs is the part of that. What we used to do is, for a Rottweiler, I mean, they're working dogs, and they're often used for Schutzhund or protection or, whatever. And so you want a dog like that, and I believe this works for short hairs or for versatile dogs too. Is I like to look at their level of forgiveness. Okay, because that tells me if the dog is soft or not. When we worked in versatile dogs, so what you can do is, the pup's usually about 6-7 weeks old, maybe about 6 weeks. I'd say about right around in there. You're holding the pup, and I will take in between their toes, and I'll pinch them, kind of good. And what do they do? Now, if they're oblivious to it, that's a good dog. If they're if they get away from you and then come back, that's okay. If they go away from you and they don't want to come back, you can't train that dog. Okay, because it doesn't forgive or forget any type of correction, and that is a pretty good indicator for trainability, right? So with Rottweilers, we did that too. Another one that I like to do is you take, where they normally play outside, just before you put them out, open up an umbrella and lay it on the ground. Or you can even open it up while they're out. Don't pop it in their face or anything stupid like that. But, just pop it open. And what do they do? Now, with Rottweilers, some of them those puppies, sort of God, will attack it. That's not a good Rottweiler. Some will, now we'll leave Rottweilers alone, but you won't see that in a versatile dog. If you do, that's not a good thing either. But what you'll see, and what you're looking at, is how is that dog going to be around a porcupine, a rattlesnake, a skunk, or something he shouldn't go by, right? So some of them are going to look at it and go, and then give it a wide berth, but continue playing. They're fine. Or even gun shyness. It's kind of like, how touchy is this dog, right? And so that umbrella kind of being in their normal space, weird, scary thing. Preferably most people like the dog that just kind of looks at it, gives it a wide berth, and goes about this normal day. You might have some that just go hide in a corner and they can't do it at all. I can't even move when that thing's out in my yard. No, they can't recover. And then you also have the other dum dums. This is going to be your porcupine dog, who's like, woohoo, yay, bam, runs right into it. What the hell is that? So I think I'll jump on it first and then find out if it's dangerous, So there's some of I learned a lot about short hairs and stuff through my days with a breed that might be a little more difficult.
Interesting. We sold a couple dogs to some folks developing. The company's actually K2 Solutions. They're based out on the East Coast, and they develop drug and bomb detection dogs primarily. And specifically speaking, one of the dogs that they got from us, her name was Blaze, and Blaze became a suicide bomber detection dog, which is human trailing and explosive trailing in a sea of stuff. And they did events and tests at if like a major sporting event's going on at a stadium that large, you're talking 50, 60, 70,000 people, whatever it is, lots. And they would have somebody running through the crowd, basically away with a backpack that had some form of explosive type scent, right, as a demonstration. And they would use her as a demo dog because she did so good at it. But like just the power of the dog's noses. And it was a cool thing. It was a cool thing to hear about. Obviously, I didn't have anything to do with the training other than developing a mentally stable dog because they bought her at a year. That was part of their government contracts, have very specific ages and things that they can work with and something. So, but one of the tests that they did when they came to evaluate the dogs was they used an umbrella, and they did open the umbrella, not right in the dog's face, but as the dog was approaching. So like maybe 10 feet away, dog is approaching on leash. Here is and not a crazy, just a slow moving, pop open an umbrella. And none of my dogs had an issue with it. And I was like, well, it makes sense. There was one dog that was kind of like, what is that? And then sniffed it and then moved on, right? That was the extent of the apprehension. And that comes from mental stability and ability to cope and adapt. And I think a big portion of that goes to genetics, but also development, right? They were handled and they were introduced and they had been and done and were properly adjusted to life. So little things like that, which is what it seemed like in my brain. He said, man, you wouldn't believe how many dogs, shoot through the roof. They're just gone. Basically 180 degrees as fast as they can back up and pulling at that leash because they're scared to death of this new random umbrella. So it was interesting. It's interesting to talk about that being something that you do or did specifically with dogs at the puppy stage, because I've never really thought about that. We do some different stuff, exposure, but not that specifically. It's interesting. Now,
it just makes I learned a lot from Rottweilers, put it that way.
I think that's something that's probably overlooked on average, is how much can be learned from looking outside of a very small niche, right? It's different. It's the same, but different, right? It is dog breeding. They are dogs, but they're very, very different. I know I took a ton of your time today, Cheryl, and we didn't get nearly as far into some of the random breeding things and stories that we're going to talk about, which all that means is that we'll have to do another one sometime when it is convenient for you. But I always enjoy the conversation. You are a wealth of knowledge and experience, and it's fun to learn. And every time I talk to you, I get to learn something new that I had no idea even potentially existed. So I want to say thank you.
And I guess for the takeaway for breeding, as far as I would say, is, you if you want to look at everybody else, go for it. That it's kind of like having a business. If you constantly want to look at your competitors, go for it. You can do that, and you should to some degree, but it should be a very small degree. What you mostly want to do is you want to be the best you can be. Are you going to make mistakes? Are there going to, is the proverbial S going to happen? Sure. But should you quit? Maybe, but you might need to start over anyway, but probably not. You probably just need to do the best that you can. Quit worrying about everybody else.
Those are great words to live by. Probably not only just as a breeding program, but life itself.
Yeah, maybe. That's true. Definitely.
Well, thanks,
Ethan. I appreciate it.
100%. And I always look forward to chatting again.